छाया आसमां देखो झूमता गगन है छाया आसमां देखो झूमता गगन So good evening, welcome to this teaching. So without no further ado, let's look at the card now. What I'm finding interesting is I think we've done 1 week of these readings and these talks so far. And out of a deck of about 80 cards, the same cards are being pulled as last week. I don't know if about the same order anyway. Tonight's card. You know, this you might get your own wisdom from seeing this word, isolation, in the card itself. But tonight this brings me into the topic of suffering. And actually, a lot of this isn't great to hear, but a lot of the spiritual traditions celebrate suffering. Not that there is a belief you should inflict suffering on yourself, because that's actually seen as, in many of the paths of India, that seem as what they call demonic, to actually make to make the body suffer unnecessarily is and the reason that they see it that way is because people actually torture their bodies in India. Some of the yogis, you know, hold their arm up above their head the whole life till it withers, and they stick all kinds of stuff and, you know, whip themselves. You know, all traditions have that. And the reason that isn't necessarily celebrated as a path is actually quite profound in the yogic system. In the yogic system, it's believed that the divine is not separate to you. So there's a saying in Christianity, what I think Christ says something like, whatever you did to the least amongst you, you did to me. And this means really that, as Mother Teresa noticed when someone said, how do you feel working with all these children who are in terrible states of distress on the streets of Calcutta? And she says, I don't see children, I see Christ. I see the Christ child. I'm serving Christ. That's what I see when I'm serving children. So this is very powerful as a form of practice, you know, even in everyday life. However, we can take this a step deeper, that if all other beings are divine, that means we are too, that we also are invited to see ourselves as Christ or Buddha or, you know, whatever you want to see, the light, you know, pure, innocent, beautiful being that is worthy of love and service. So this is why quite often why it's not recommended to do too many austerities for the body to make it suffer too much. So I pulled up a couple of quotes as I've just pulled this card before we did this teaching tonight. Let me read you 2 of these short wisdom teachings around suffering. The first I'm going to read to you is actually echoed in the Taoist belief system. It's probably in Christianity somewhere. I'm just not as au fait with Christianity as I am with Zen and Taoism and Vedanta, of these Eastern approaches. This is a short 5-lined poem that summarizes the yogic tradition and the Taoist and their view on suffering. And so the teaching is, take pain and pleasure alike. Regard the clod of earth, a stone, in the same way you would a piece of gold. Hold them in equal value. And view praise and blame in the same way. So this is echoed in all these Eastern traditions. In Taoism, it says someone in an alignment with the Tao. For me, that means our true nature. Someone in alignment with their true nature sees, he describes it quite poetically. He said, someone in alignment with Tao, the natural way, is like the forces of nature. In nature, when the rain is falling, the rain is falling. Nothing else is happening. When the sun is shining, the sun is shining. When a storm comes, there's a storm. When it's a beautiful summer's day, it's a beautiful summer's day. In other words, it's all as it is. And so he goes on to say, someone in alignment with the natural way, the soul, the Tao, the divine, is alike in sadness and joy and pain and pleasure. Now, I haven't met anyone who can be completely alike with terrible toothache or really bad sickness in the body, but really it's an invitation, I think, to meet reality. Not that we don't try and ease suffering, because that's the idea of the spiritual path towards inner peace and happiness. But actually, sometimes, as Carl Jung used to say, what we resist persists, what we allow or examine dissolves. So this is the invitation. Can we meet reality as it is without adding to, if, say, for example, we have some worry in our life, how do we not add to that worry unnecessarily? And so we can start to see, as far as a path of mysticism, and this leads us on to the next quote I have. This is a Zen quote on suffering that will help us deepen into this understanding. It's a quote from a great Zen master called Suzuki Roshi, one of the great bringers of the Japanese Zen tradition to America. And it's a short quotation again, and it starts with one of his students. And it says, a student filled with emotion and crying implored, "Why is there so much suffering?" To which Suzuki Zen master Roshi replied, "No reason." That was Zen is like a lightning bolt. No reason. Think about that for a moment, or don't think about it, would be another accurate way of describing it. The reason that we give to suffering can make the suffering 1,000 times worse. Maybe the reason is, oh, I am a bad person. I'm not as good as everyone else. This always happens to me. This suffering is never going to end. And so we layer after layer of pain and uncertainty and fear and projection on top of something that we can otherwise be quite present to. So suffering is seen as noble on the spiritual path because usually, in my experience, it's sometimes called fierce grace. The uncertainty about the future, the inability to cope with something that's happening, is the very medicine that brings us into the great and profound teaching from the Christian Bible. If the only thing you have is God, you have everything. So what is God? What is the divine? What is the Tao? What is this pure consciousness, this state of internal heaven? It's a state which is free of the suffering. In other words, there may be some anxiety or sadness, but it's how we're meeting that adds to it or lessens it. The stories, the minds, and the emotional reactions. If we can just step back, if we have compassion towards ourselves within that can sometimes work miracles.